Hi everyone, this is a short screencast for Independent Colleges Dublin for CIMA E2 for the November 2014 exam. Okay. I'll draw your attention to question 3 of May 2013 on the CIMA website, or if you're using the BPP text, question 41 A and B on page 18. Okay, so the subject of this particular screencast is project risk and indeed uncertainty in requirement A, as you'll see, and indeed part B, just the ways in which you can manage risk, and you may recall a mnemonic that is helpful in that respect. Now, the scenario in this particular case is one of those short ones from part A, not overly important to us. The bones of the question are here really, it's not really scenario specific. Okay. So in terms of the answer to this, if we look at part A for this particular requirement, what we'll see is that really we're looking to really define risk and define uncertainty, and to look at the differences between each of them. Okay, so project risk first. What we're saying here is that certainly with any project there'll be various types and various degrees of risk. A key point is that we can sort of split risk down into two main parts. The first part really would be what we would call quantifiable risks, and we can sort of predict or assess them with some level of certainty, perhaps using some sort of scientific or mathematical method. Okay. The other side of risk is really just sort of unquantifiable, or perhaps better explained to be, where quantitative accuracy is not really possible, so that we'll need some sort of subjective assessment of the risk itself. Now, how we would do that, we're going to have to involve a risk assessor in some way, and the accuracy of these sort of subjective judgments will depend on not only the information but also the knowledge and the skills of the person making the judgment. Yeah, and make a nice point here in terms of where we're subjectively assessing risk. It may well be that managers are biased in some way, shape or form. So that's a little bit of a concern, but helpful to mention that in terms of this overall definition. So really two sides, quantifiable versus non-quantifiable, and in the latter case we need some sort of assessment or judgment. Okay. Now on the other side of the fence, really we have what we would call uncertainty. And really what we're saying with that is that it's, uncertainty is impossible to evaluate in some way, shape or form. We have an uncertain event of some kind, and we can't assess its probability or the likelihood that it will happen. Now, how do we deal with that? Well, what we do is we sort of plan in a contingent sense. So, we think of sort of possible scenarios or scenario plans in which these possible uncertainties can be identified. And, scenarios are essentially sort of predictions of the future, as maybe stories about the future. So just to give us an idea of possible situations. And really that's what we're trying to do, is to think up of a series of scenarios that enable us to manage these events should they happen. Okay. Last point here, a good one to make. I just being sort of proactive in terms of the individual entities or companies' actions is going to help, particularly if there's an environment that is rapidly changing or is very, very uncertain. Okay. So that's part A. Part B really deals with our mnemonic. You'd probably be familiar with the Tower mnemonic. I'll sort of draw your attention to the 4 T's as well, but Tower is the one that's more sort of commonly used. And really this particular requirement, as you recall, is asking us to look at ways in which risks can be managed or mitigated. Okay, so first option here is really just to accept the risk as it stands, and really to take no impact. Now, we would need in that circumstance, obviously, to keep the situation under review, and this is really not a sort of a technique that we would be inclined to use for risks that are perceived to be quite significant. We can't really accept or do nothing about significant risks. Okay. Second option here is to reduce, take some action to reduce indeed the risk, or indeed limit its impact in some way, or perhaps bring it down to what we would call an acceptable threshold. Okay, it may well be that that's facilitated through using a sort of a less complex process, perhaps. Okay, transference. This is one that students tend to remember because it's sort of linked into insurance, or indeed passing the risk on to another party. Okay, that other party will take responsibility and really manage the risk for us in some way. You know, the insurance bit is something that students will remember. Just remember that we could also subcontract the risk out to a specialist in some way. Okay, next point. Just in relation to avoidance, really two areas here under this heading. Students sometimes get one, but not the other. I mean, students are happy enough to talk about sort of, you know, exiting the strategy. In other words, perhaps not going ahead with the project at all. But you know, we could try and perhaps remove the factors associated with the risk, or change the project plan in some way. Okay. It may well be, though, that as I mentioned here, that the changing things could be very, very expensive. So it may well be that we're left in a position where we have to avoid the project, or indeed this particular strategy altogether. Okay. Final point, nice conclusion here. You know, over and above, you know, the standard mnemonic, and perhaps this is the sort of thing that a student might not think of doing. Is just sort of mentioning the fact that, you know, we're talking about management of risk, and this is a continuous process. You know, it doesn't happen just at the outset, or perhaps in the planning phase of the project. It should be continuous, particularly in sort of dynamic environments, and frequent risk assessments are important. We're regularly reviewing each of the risks that we've identified and seeing where we're at in connection with them. Okay, hope that helps. Watch out for this area. It's fairly straightforward in terms of its answers, so you know, just learning the basics will get you certainly above that 5 out of 10 if it comes up as a 5-mark question. Just the basic. Learn that mnemonic and those key definitions, and you should be fine. Many thanks.